Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing a book review on America's First Daughter by Stephanie Dray and Laura Kamoe, and Sisi, Empress on Her Own by Alison Pataki. America's First Daughter by Stephanie Dray and Laura Kamoe tells the story of Patsy Jefferson, the eldest daughter of America's third president, Thomas Jefferson. Even as a child, Patsy understands her father's devotion to the country he helped make free, and follows her father to France, where she witnesses the beginning of the French Revolution. Over the course of her life, Patsy comes to realize the hypocrisies of her country and has to protect the legacy of her father at all costs. First of all, I won this book on Goodreads, so thank you very much, Goodreads, and this is an ARC copy. I am so glad I won this book, you guys. Very good, pleasantly surprised with it. And you know what? I'm an American. I just feel so ashamed. I don't even know half of my own history in this country, which is horrible to say. And I tell you what, I feel like I learned a lot about Patsy Jefferson. To be quite honest, I've never really given her much thought. You know, she's overshadowed by her more famous father. And I really loved finding out more about Patsy Jefferson, including her father, Thomas Jefferson, just learning more about that family dynamic. So this novel is told entirely from the perspective of Patsy Jefferson, from the time she's about 9 years old until she's about 50. And Patsy faces a lot in her life. She faces the death of her mother. She faces the terror of escaping the British who have come to collect her father. She experiences the turmoil of the French Revolution, and she also has her own love life to deal with. And probably the biggest obstacle to this story is when Patsy Jefferson first discovers the scandalous relationship that her father has with their black slave, Sally Hemings. And the number one thing that Patsy Jefferson has to do over the course of her life is protect the legacy that her father has set up. Because even though there are those who agree with Thomas Jefferson, there are those who seek to ruin his reputation. And I really found Patsy Jefferson such a fascinating historical figure. I think Stephanie Dray and Laura Kamoe do a fantastic job of fleshing her out as a character. I think she's presented as a very well-rounded figure. She starts off as a very innocent, naive child, but we see her grow and develop over the course of the novel when she starts to realize the nature of hypocrisy, the hypocrisy in her father, the hypocrisy in her country. Because just because the Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal, not everybody is created equal, obviously, because there are still the slaves and the women who are not equal. And I definitely gotta praise Stephanie Dray, Laura Kamoe. Their research is marvelous. You can clearly tell they did their research. Everything is put together perfectly, I think. I do gotta say, I found the first half of the novel the most interesting to read about. Pretty much the time from Patsy being 9 years old until she's about a teenager or so, her whole entire time spent in France, and her discovering her first love, and her being part of the French courts while her father is an ambassador and whatnot. I definitely found all that the most interesting for whatever reason. That being said, the second half of the novel was just as good too, but I did find myself getting a little bored on occasion, and sometimes the plot would just move so quickly, getting through the rest of Patsy's life. Very monotonous. That's kind of the word that comes to mind about the second half of the novel. Very monotonous, because Patsy Jefferson did have 11 children. So we go through the birth of all 11 of those children in that second half of the novel, which is a lot. But yeah, you guys, I highly enjoyed this book. I highly recommend it. It's definitely going to be in my top favorites of the year. So moving on to the next review. Sisi, Empress on Her Own by Alison Pataki tells the extraordinary story of Empress Elizabeth of Austria-Hungary, wife of Emperor Franz Joseph. Elizabeth, or Sisi, has been married for 15 years, has produced 3 living children, and she finds herself stifled and restricted by court protocol. All she wants to do is wander freely and travel the world. Sisi finds herself in an age of crumbling monarchies, and she tries everything in her power to keep her family together while dealing with her own loves and losses. First of all, I won this book on Goodreads, so thanks once again, Goodreads, and this is an ARC copy. Whew, yeah guys, I loved this book. So good. So good. Very much like America's First Daughter, this is certainly going to be in my top favorites list of the year. And I tell you what, I am so incredibly ashamed that I've never heard about this lady. I have never heard about Empress Elizabeth of Austria-Hungary, and it shames me to say that. This is literally my first experience with this incredible woman. Before I do head into my thoughts about this book, just a heads up, this is a duology. What I have here is the second book, which I wasn't aware when I first picked this book up. That being said though, you can head into this book with no problem, I think. Like if you just want to skip the first book, because my understanding of the first book, I think that deals with Elizabeth as a child in her teen years, her marrying Franz Joseph, and her relationship with her mother-in-law and whatnot. And yeah, this book, it's already 15 years into her marriage at the start of the book. And I definitely think you can pick up this book, no problem, without reading the other one, because I didn't find myself lost or confused or anything. Like I said, I went into this book, I didn't know what to expect. I was very unfamiliar with Empress Elizabeth. Pleasantly surprising read. I found it incredibly quick-moving, very fast-paced, very interesting for someone like me. The book can get a little tedious on occasion because Elizabeth, she gets into these moods and she constantly wants to be moving around. So the book can get a little tedious with the constant number of breaks and vacations that Sisi takes over the course of the entire novel. But at the same time, even though that was a little tedious, at the same time that would introduce a whole new set of characters which would help the plot continue moving. And I really appreciated the amount of time and research Alison Pataki took with this novel. You can clearly see she did her research. And she also has a really great author's note at the back of the book, which I appreciated. Like I said, I'm not familiar with this time in history. I appreciated Alison Pataki taking the time to share any historic liberties she took. The Empress Elizabeth, Sisi, she was a truly terrific character to read about. She definitely has her quirks and her flaws. She's by no means a perfect human being. And to be quite honest, she can be a hard woman to love on occasion. I found myself throughout the novel, sometimes I would love her, but then other times I'd be shaking my head like, Elizabeth, why are you doing these things? You find yourself throughout the novel constantly wanting to yell at her, tell her to make a different decision, act a particular sort of way. But it is because of Sisi's flaws and her eccentric behavior that makes her a character easy to understand, I think. And despite her very eccentric behavior, there's also the side of her that desperately loves her children and the fact that she would do anything for her children. And Elizabeth, in general, she was one of those historical figures, even though the back of this book explains Elizabeth as being the Princess Diana of her time. It's not always smooth sailing for Elizabeth. Sometimes the people love her, sometimes the people hate her. And you gotta think too, the time that this book takes place in, it's in the time of the crumbling monarchies, rebellions, revolts. So yeah, you have that group of people who want to do away with the monarchies and have absolutely no love for Elizabeth. And you know, there was so much about Elizabeth's life, just like I said, an extraordinary woman, the things she had to deal with. She had to deal with the stigma of her family's mental illness. Apparently there was some mental illness that ran down her family tree. She had to deal with the insanity of her cousin, King Ludwig II of Bavaria, which were my favorite chapters, by the way. King Ludwig, he was definitely my favorite character, as wild and crazy as he was. Those were definitely my favorite chapters. Plus, there was a lot of inner family drama she had to deal with. The suicide of one of her sons. And also her constant back and forth between her love interests, Captain Andrazi and Captain Bay Middleton. And this is historical fiction, and I don't consider historical fiction to have spoilers in it, so just to go right to the very end of the novel, I didn't know Empress Elizabeth was assassinated. I found that so devastating to read about. She's assassinated when she's about 60 years old. Man, what a way for a woman like her to go down. Like I said, she lived such an extraordinary life. She was such an extraordinary person in general. And then, yeah, to be assassinated later in her life. Oh my god, it was so heartbreaking to read about, you guys. And speaking of the man who assassinates Empress Elizabeth, my one complaint with this novel mostly has to do with some of the scene transitioning, because throughout the novel we would have a chapter with Empress Elizabeth, and then we would have like this little interlude in between chapters, and it would be from the point of view of the person who would eventually assassinate Empress Elizabeth. And I found those interludes to be a little bit weird. I mean, there was a context to them, but at the same time I found them a little weird in their placement, and I don't think they entirely needed to be there. And then my other large complaint with the novel, sometimes I felt like stories were open-ended or never resolved. Like, a chapter would end on a cliffhanger of a sort, but then the next chapter wouldn't address that cliffhanger, and sometimes it would be a little confusing. Sometimes I felt like there were gaps in the narrative. But overall, like I keep saying, this is definitely going to be one of my favorite books of the year. I highly enjoyed it. I highly recommend it, especially if you already love the Empress Elizabeth, or if you've never learned about her. I think this is a good gateway to learn about her, because she was definitely a very fascinating and complex woman. So that's it for these two book reviews. In the comments below, have you guys read these books? Do you want to read them? Just let me know your thoughts down below. So that's it for these book reviews. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this book review, you may like these other book reviews. Bye, guys.